Okay, I think we should start. We have a good amount of people in the room. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar hosted by the Middle East Council on Global Affairs in partnership with the Issam Fares Institute at the American University of Beirut. My name is Omar Rahman. I am a fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs and your moderator for today's event. We have a big turnout. There's been lots of questions already submitted. If you have any questions during the webinar itself, please submit them into the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as we can, depending on the time. We're obviously here to discuss the unfolding tragedy in Gaza and its implications inside Palestine and beyond. I assume everybody has been glued to their televisions like myself, glued to their social media, and does not need a lengthy introduction into how this began on October 7th and what has happened over the past almost 3 weeks. So I'm just going to say a few words on where we are today, and the focus of the webinar is going to be on explaining this, where we're headed in Gaza, in Palestine, Israel, the region, and beyond, as a result of October 7th and its aftermath. Obviously, the death toll now in Gaza is spiraling. According to the latest news, more than 7,000 people have been killed by Israeli bombs in Gaza. Nearly 3,000 of them are children. The videos and images that we are seeing are the stuff of our worst nightmares. So more than 40% of the homes in Gaza have been destroyed. Millions are displaced. The total siege that has been implemented at the start of this, cutting water, food, electricity, and fuel, has exhausted all resources, and hospitals are running out of vital necessities, in addition to being bombed, along with schools, shelters, apartment buildings. So there's very few places safe for people to go, including in the south. A single strike yesterday in Khan Yunis brought down several apartment buildings, according to Reuters. So anyway, to help us discuss what is happening and where we're headed, we have an esteemed panel of experts. Joseph Bahut is the director of the Issam Fares Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs, and he's a professor at AUB. Excuse me. Inez Abdelrazak is the executive director of the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy. And Rami Khouri is a distinguished fellow at Issam Fares and the former director of global engagement there. And he's an internationally syndicated political columnist, an author, and a professor of journalism. Rami, I'm going to start with you. Less than a week ago, Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, issued a statement outlining the closest thing we've seen to an Israeli plan or an Israeli strategy. The first of that phase, as he called them, is a continuation of the bombing that's happened, followed by a ground operation to defeat and destroy Hamas. Second would be, a lower intensity continuation of that. And the third is, I quote, the creation of a new security regime in the Gaza Strip and the removal of Israel's responsibilities for day-to-day life in Gaza. That last one, I think, is the crucial one. It's a bit vague. It's a bit cryptic. Are you able to interpret that for us, put it in context of what we're seeing today, how this is likely to unfold? Are these realistic? And what are the kind of implications for the people of Gaza and for the people of Palestine and their quest for liberation?
Yeah, thank you, Omar, and thank you to Issam Fares Institute, AUB, and the Middle East Council in Doha for hosting this. It's a pleasure to be with you both. And thanks to the audience who's tuning in. The first thing I want to say is that let us remember the context of this situation. 2023 is exactly 100 years after the British mandate for Palestine came into effect in 1923. So what we're seeing here, I think, the big picture, are the logical and expected consequences of a colonial settler policy in Palestine, driven very much and supported militarily and politically and diplomatically by the colonial power of the day, which was England back then, the United States today, against an indigenous Arab population, the Palestinians, who really don't have the ability to withstand the powers against them, and this is the logical conclusion. When you do this for a century, you keep building settlements, you keep colonizing, you keep subjugating, imprisoning, killing, torturing, injuring, expelling, silencing Palestinians in Palestine, and then move to the next stage of what they're doing now, which we'll talk about later, trying to silence Palestinian voices all over the world. What we see, this ferocity, is on both sides. This cruelty is totally expected, so we shouldn't be surprised. The question, I think, is where do we go from here? The Israelis have this 3 stages plan that they've announced, and what I would say about that is that almost anything that you read or hear today about what's going to happen next in Gaza, or in Israel, and of course all of Palestine and the West Bank and elsewhere, is 90% speculation, because not only do we not know what the Israeli government is planning, the prevalent sentiment, especially what I hear in the United States from knowledgeable people, is that the Israelis don't actually have a very firm, clear plan. They keep adjusting as they go along. But the three stages that they've talked about are totally logical from their perspective, that they want to stop anybody in Gaza, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, whoever comes along after them or with them, from attacking Israelis. That's very obvious, that's normal, it's human nature. And they're going to try a much more vicious strategy to physically wipe out as much as they can of both the civilian infrastructure, the civilian population centers, the political and military infrastructure and facilities of Hamas, and therefore Hamas's leadership and its capability of hitting Israel. They want to try to eradicate militant resistance from Gaza. A century after the settler colonial endeavor was launched by the British and now is supported by the Americans mostly, and the British are still there cheerleading. My suggestion is we should look at the 3 stages more as we look at the Three Stooges cartoon characters in the United States, the comic characters. These 3 stages are not credible, serious mechanisms to bring about what the Israelis say they want to bring about. And especially when the Israelis and the Americans now talk openly that this, Hamas is ISIS, Hamas is ISIS. And this is also a strategy that the Zionist movement and then later the State of Israel and now the United States have used for the last 100 years to discredit anybody who stands up to their settler colonial apartheid system. And that's the only way that they can try to discredit them. And it worked in the past, not working so well today, which we'll talk about later. So I would say the 3 stages are aspirational on the part of the Israelis, very formulaic. It's, normally what you do if somebody's attacking you, you want to try to stop them from attacking you in the future. The possibility of achieving their goals is very unclear. They've done it in the past, partially, and it's never succeeded. And what's always happened, and I'll finish with this, what's always happened in Palestine from the 40s until today, every time you get a Palestinian national movement, whether it's a political movement or a resistance movement or whatever it is, against the British, against the Zionists, against the US, whatever, when the movement doesn't do so well, like the PLO in the very early 50s, when it was set up, wasn't getting anywhere. So Arafat and Fatah took over. They tried, they didn't get very far. Then you got more radical groups like PFLP and DFLP and others. And they had some militant terrorist groups who started hijacking planes. And when that didn't get very far, then you got the Muslim Brotherhood getting involved, and then you got Hamas, and now you have Islamic Jihad, and who knows what's going to come next. The lesson is that every time a Palestinian militant or political group doesn't achieve the national rights that the Palestinian people expect to have, they are replaced by somebody who's more radical and more militant. And the Israelis cannot wipe this out, because this is an organic response that comes out of any subjugated, occupied, dehumanized population. And this is what we're seeing 100 years after this process started. So I wouldn't pay much attention to the 3 stages and see what happens on the ground now with the negotiations to release the prisoners and other things that might happen.
And so ultimately what you're saying is, unless these underlying issues are addressed, there will continue to be kind of resistance, whether from Gaza or somewhere else. So let's move to Inez in terms of somewhere else. Obviously, all the focus of the past 3 weeks or so has been on what's happening in Gaza, what happened in southern Israel, during Hamas's attack and the carnage it left. There is, and obviously on the international dimension, which we'll get to shortly, because there's a lot of concern there. What has kind of flown under the radar a bit, Inez, is what's happening elsewhere in Palestine itself and within Israel, within West Bank, Jerusalem, and among Israel's citizens. So even prior to October 7th, this year, 2023, was on pace to be the deadliest on record for Palestinians since the Second Intifada. And that followed 2022, which was also the deadliest on record. Obviously, we've seen pogroms, settler attacks, that kind of thing. Has there been an uptick? Has there been a noticeable change since October 7th? What can you tell us about what's happening?
Thank you, Omar, and thank you for the invitation. I'm here as an analyst, obviously, to talk about how do we move from here, how do we go from here, but I'm also here as a Palestinian, and I want to say I'm not sure people really realize the scale of the attack against our people in Gaza, and we keep seeing just figures getting worse and worse. And the scale of it is that I think every one of us know Palestinians, whether in Palestine or outside Palestine, actually know a friend, a family friend who's lost their house, who's lost their relatives, who are displaced either for the first time or once again. So it's very difficult for everyone, and I think it's our responsibility for those of us who have the privilege to do so to talk and to keep speaking out. But I think it's a really big toll on all of us. And I think that obviously the utmost urgency that we're all calling for is an immediate ceasefire, because that's what our people in Gaza need. And we know it's not enough, but it's the first and foremost priority. And so in the West Bank, so I sit in Ramallah right now, and we've been obviously following what's happening. So it's clearly related. I think all Palestinians are saying that, unfortunately, the narrative in the West and in the international media is that this is, either an Israel-Hamas war or this is a Gaza-Israel war. It's not. It's a war on Palestine. And I think the 7th of October events, the attack of Hamas, are also related to what was happening before in the West Bank and in Jerusalem. And it's very important to understand that because there's been, and there still is, the direct, intent to fragment the Palestinians, to forcibly separate us. We've been separated from Gaza already more than 16 years. Without the ability to go at all, and I think the intent here is also to make it look like we have different territories, different causes, but the Palestinians are one people and who have been deliberately separated and fragmented. And it's very clear now in the West Bank, who controls, again, many analysts and Palestinians have been saying this for decades, but we live in a reality where Israel controls the entire territory, not only is surrounding Gaza, and besieging Gaza, but the territory where we live is entirely controlled by the Israelis. So I sit in Ramallah, but we've been closed. Basically, we cannot go in and out. The checkpoints have been closed since October 8th. And basically, what is usually the ability to move at least a bit between towns, Ramallah, Nablus, etc., is completely shut down right now. Palestinians who need also Israeli permits, who had permits to work on the Israeli side, are now sitting at home and have obviously been denied all of these permits. And the crackdown has obviously increased. So what's happening that I don't think many have reported is there's been 100 Palestinians who've been killed since October 7 in the West Bank. there was already 5,000 prisoners in Israeli prisons, political prisoners, among them some administrative detainees who are, held completely arbitrarily. There's 300 more administrative detainees. More than 1,000 people have been arrested, including on the Israeli side, Palestinian citizens of Israel who have been, it's completely forbidden to protest in solidarity with Gaza. So people have been arrested over social media posts. And so the situation is really terrible, and I think it's deliberate of the government, of the Israeli government, to prompt the Israeli settlers to continue and I would say increase their attacks against Palestinians. So again, before October 7, there's been many warnings of, this has been the deadliest years, 2022 and 2023 for Palestinians in decades. Even before October 7, attacks raised on refugee camps have been, regular pogroms and attacks by settlers against Palestinian villages, extrajudicial killings of Palestinians. I mean, we are talking an average of 5 Palestinians per week were killed in 2023 since January and before October 7. And so right now what we're seeing is a worsening trend of actually encouraging settlers. The Knesset passed a legislation to facilitate, the settlers holding guns, which is basically just arming people to just go around and kill Palestinians, which is very frightening. So people are scared. The streets and the roads are mainly empty of Palestinians because settlers are around, and it's actually quite scary. You can just get shot by a settler. And so this is the situation, and I think it's again part and parcel of the settler colonial reality that Mr. Khoury was reminding, right? We have to see that the isolation and marginalization of Gaza, the exceptionalization of Gaza, has been part and parcel of the annexation plan of the West Bank, and of the overall plan to continue controlling further Palestinians and isolating them.
Thank you. Those were very excellent comments, and you drew a very important line as well between, what happens in the rest of the Palestine and what happens in Gaza. Obviously, we saw, in May 2021, that dynamic play out as well with, attacks on Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and the kind of tensions that were building in Jerusalem spread elsewhere, spread to Gaza, and that led to different dynamics, and one that, in a sense, is kind of playing out today. In the rest of the country, and we didn't. I mean, you mentioned as well, the kind of fanatical elements that are within this Israeli government and their own plans, their own designs on the West Bank as well, including, I think 10,000 assault rifles were, handed out to settlers and to others in communities. So it is a very scary future. Joseph, let's zoom out a little bit. Lebanon has been the kind of most likely arena or front for a possible escalation beyond the borders of Israel-Palestine itself. So far, we've seen kind of a low intensity back and forth, tit for tat from the beginning between Hezbollah and the Israelis, but nothing really dramatic yet. What are the internal dynamics that are playing out in Lebanon? How likely is a more full-scale escalation? And then maybe a discussion of the possibilities of a larger kind of regional conflagration, if you don't mind.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much, Omar, for moderating this panel, and thank you for Middle East Council for partnering with us at IFI in an event that is both, I think, analytical and very also, let's say, emotional. We're talking at a moment where lives are on the line, lives are really taken off, and huge destruction is underway. So we have a thought for all this while we're trying to keep cold-blooded and analytical here. Before answering your question from a purely Lebanese point of view, I think part of the answer to your question has to do with something probably I will prolong in Rami's answer about the three-part plan. First of all, let me add to what Rami said, that maybe among the 3 parts of the plan, maybe the only one that is probably going to work is the first one, which is heavy shelling, heavy destruction, trying to root out as much as Israel can of Hamas's infrastructure. The rest is, of course, under question. Why am I saying that? Because it has a relation with whatever decision Iran and Hezbollah could take to escalate. I think that maybe at the point where Hamas could be seriously eradicated in terms where it could endanger, let's say, the geopolitical construction of these forces in the region, yes, Hezbollah could be probably not only tempted, but required to take action. The second thing that has a relation with what's happening on the Lebanese front with the three-parts plan, Rami maybe didn't mention that this plan is seriously questioned also by the American backers of Israel. I mean, there is today, and yesterday the Israeli press made it very clear, there is today a group of high-level American officers sitting with the restricted military cabinet in Israel and trying to really push the Israeli planners to answer a difficult and sensitive question. Okay, you enter in Gaza and you want to root out Hamas. First of all, how do you do it? And second, what's the, not the guarantee, but what is the, let's say, the proof of concept, if you want to say so, that this is going to work? And what will be the replacement of Hamas? I think that the same American, and this is why I'm tying it to Lebanon, the same American quote-unquote skepticism about Israel's war plan is also adapting to the northern front. I think that it was very clear a few days ago that the Americans said to the Israelis, look, first of all, you don't have an interest now in having two fronts on your hands. And second, the other front will not be a promenade. It won't be something easy as in 2006. From here, I move to your question. I've been saying this for now 2 weeks, and it's a difficult position to hold, but I think that there is still enough of a deterrent equation that is preventing the Lebanese front to completely flare up. And this has to do with many things. Of course, it has to do with what I said. I mean, with the reluctance of Israel in battling and fighting on two fronts. One of them will be very difficult and very costly. Israel knows very well that Hezbollah is not the same political, military, let's say, entity or animal, or I mean something that is like 2006. It's much more powerful, it has much more harming capacity, and this will not be easy to take out. Second, from Hezbollah's point of view, Hezbollah is both unwilling and I think also very reluctant to embark on that. Because first of all, Hezbollah knows very well that the situation in Lebanon is very different from 2006. The situation in Lebanon is today a very, very difficult, if not chaotic, and it's a country in shambles completely on the economic front. It's a country that is very deeply disunited on the political front, which was not the case in 2006. Hezbollah knows that the political and economic cost of any action would be tremendous for Lebanon and for themselves, for their own population. There is something like 25,000 Lebanese villagers from the south, mostly Shias, mostly belonging to Hezbollah's, let's say, constituency, that have fled in the past days. And Hezbollah is feeling that they are not very welcome outside their, let's say, natural ecosystem. And if this goes further and takes a wider scale, it will be very difficult to manage an internal situation in Lebanon that will be very frictional. Last, but most importantly, I think, and this is maybe part of another discussion later on in this debate, Lebanon is still considered by most of analysts as the natural second front, but I don't think that it's any more true. Lebanon is one among many other fronts. As Ines said, and you hinted, and Rami hinted, probably the second front that is a candidate to flare up is the internal front in the West Bank. I think that if the situation in Gaza gets more tragic, this is where things will move. And this is what's going to be probably the most, let's say, dangerous distraction for the Israeli forces. It will be to fight internally in Gaza and on the West Bank front. Also, besides Lebanon and other than Lebanon, you have other asymmetric fronts that are also amenable to be activated, like the Syria front, like the Iraq front against the Americans if they cover up this action, like the Yemeni one. And of course, the Lebanese one is a natural one that comes to mind. But if you are in the shoes of an Iranian strategist or a Hezbollah strategist, and you know that Hezbollah is among all these forces that are supporting Gaza, supporting Hamas, whatever you want to put it, and you are the elite component, you are the elite force, you will not burn it in the first episode of the war. You will keep that for when things become really dire and serious. So this is why also, and this is my reading of things, this is why also, if you look at it from a more granular point of view, it's the Israelis who are today trying to, let's say, encroach Hezbollah in order to drag it in a higher level of confrontation. Hezbollah has lost until, I think, this afternoon, something like 52 or 53 combatants, elite combatants who are shooting Cornet rockets on tanks and equipment on the border of Israel. And they have been shot down because they are operating from very close. I think that if anything is shown by that, is that it's Israel that is really trying probably to engage Hezbollah in a confrontation, maybe with the calculus that this would trigger a huge American response, and then it will probably drag in the American firepower in this battle, something that so far the Biden administration is very reluctant in doing. Also, I think that, Hezbollah is really showing a high level of self-restraint. I mean, we know how this formidable force operates usually. It's very, it's very difficult for them to usually swallow 52 or 53 killed in 2 weeks. Usually they would have answered much more harshly and much more quickly and much more widely. So far they are not. So I think that for all these reasons, the front will remain not calm, but within a mid-level, let's say a mid-level confrontation scene or scenario. But if things drag on in Gaza, and this is where we come back to the three-parts plan, if Israel gets into a full-fledged ground invasion, if the amount of casualties in Gaza reaches out unbearable levels, where the public opinion is maybe pushing Hezbollah and others to act, things could change. Also, what could change, and this is probably the most, let's say, sensitive part of the answer, if the very astute message exchanging today between Hezbollah, the Americans, and the Israelis on the northern part of the border in Israel is flowed or goes in a wrong way, and there are parties who are ensuring this message exchanging, and I think, we know that this is the case. It happens through the UNIFIL, through maybe Qatar, through Oman, or other channels. If there is a miscommunication and a misunderstanding of that, maybe also we could see the front going spiraling. But so far, I think things will remain under control, which brings us back to Rami's analysis of the three-part plan and the dilemma Israel is today confronting towards Gaza. If you read the Israeli press, there is a very deep and very difficult soul-searching today in Israel's, let's say, staff, in the military establishment, in the political establishment. What can we do towards Gaza? What can we do to reestablish Israel's military aura without putting Israel in a new trap that will be probably inextricable. So I would sum it up by saying that Israel is in a situation where it's damned if you do and damned if you don't. And this is, I think, very difficult for them. And this is why probably this war will go on at a level of attrition for probably a few weeks and maybe a few months. And this will be horrible on the human and the humanitarian level.
Thank you, Joseph. That's some fascinating analysis. I mean, if we had hours, I would dig into many parts of what you said, and hopefully we can get back to some of the components that you mentioned. One aspect of it, though, is the kind of American role here in this whole thing. One, in terms of, a level of bringing in military, that a level of deterrence that is kind of keeping maybe Lebanon from exploding on that front. But one thing you mentioned was that the U.S. backers have kind of questioned Israel's plans. One thing they have done more fully, though, since the start has been, the Western response in general, but U.S. also in particular, has been kind of a full-throated backing and unconditional backing of Israel's, quote unquote, right to defend itself and to carry on this campaign to eliminate Hamas. So I want to bring Rami back in. And Rami, you did mention, when Joseph brought it up, but you did mention, that aspect as well in terms of questioning Israel's plans. But when it comes to the U.S. response, you're based in the U.S., you pay close attention to this. Can you explain to us a little bit? And at this point, after the first round of long explanations, let's try to keep it a little bit more concise from everybody so that we have time to get through everything. But just kind of explain, why. Everybody expects the U.S. to back the Israelis and for Western European countries to do the same to an extent, but to refuse calls for ceasefire. What are the implications of this? This is generating real anger in the Arab world, beyond. Can you dig into that a bit, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. The fascinating thing about the American response, and also much of the West European one, is that they have impulsively, almost chromosomally, given all-out support to Israel to do anything it wants, and they'll give it ammunition. They send all kinds of symbolic and real forces and assistance. They protect it at the UN and the ICC. So it's unbelievably comprehensive and intense and total support for what Israel wants to do. This is almost unprecedented to see this kind of intensity and unanimity in the Western world's response. There are some areas that don't follow this, parts of Spain, Ireland, and others. So that's important to understand. Why is this happening? And then right after it started, you started to get now some questioning in the U.S. about, do the Israelis actually have a plan? Do they know what they're doing? Are they just going to repeat what they did 4, 8, 12 years ago and then pull out, and then this will happen again in another 5 years? I think the realization is among policymakers that the traditional total support for Israel is critical for American politicians, but it's not critical for the population as a whole. And this is the most significant thing I see here in the United States. If you notice, the intense support for Israel is from the White House, most of the Congress, and some state level officials who don't know the Middle East and South China, but it's really the White House and Congress that's most important. It's really intense. The media support is strong, but not as strong as it used to be. There's a lot of voices that are critical. And in society as a whole, you have a far more diverse situation with universities, students, religious institutions, labor unions, professional associations, media, and the business world. Any area you look in society beyond the White House and the Congress, you have a much more reasonable perception among Americans of what's going on in the Middle East. And this is supported in the polling evidence showing that slowly, Americans are becoming more even-handed. They want the Israelis and the Palestinians to have their rights. They want the U.S. to support that. So this is really, I think, the critical thing to notice, that and this is fascinating, because it means that the traditional military policies of Israel versus the Palestinians are not succeeding very well because they have to keep doing it every few years. And while they're waiting a few years, Hezbollah has become powerful and caused a situation of mutual deterrence on that border. And Hamas has now become powerful and can do what it wants. A week ago, we had people, the Houthis and Ansarullah, and you had people in Iraq and Syria and Lebanon, and all of them sending little rockets or drones or things against American targets all over the Middle East. So the signal is that the military strategy for Israel can be repeated, but at huge cost, and also in the face of the problems that Israel realized in its intelligence and its military preparedness on October 7th. This is matched by a realization in the US that the traditional public diplomacy policy, propaganda policy, political pressure and lobbying policy has also started to fray at the edges and is not as strong as it used to be 20 and 30 and 40 years ago. So that the area where the Israelis can pressure the United States to give them whatever they want without question has been now reduced to the White House, the Congress, and pockets in society here and there. And you have massive protests all over the US among student groups and church groups and things like that. So there is a big change taking place here in the United States, but it's low intensity, it's on the ground, and you have to really look locally to see these things. Here in Cambridge, where I live, I've been involved in things at Harvard and other universities, and you see this very clearly. There's hundreds and hundreds of students and professors who come to teach-ins. They want to know, they want to understand. The bottom line, the Israeli line of the last century, the propaganda line, the lying, the exaggeration, the distortions, the diversions, have reached the limit of their effectiveness and are starting to fray at the edges. And people are realizing this because for the first time in the last 5 years, ordinary people can see on their phones at home, on TV, what Israel is actually doing on the ground in Hawara and in Safriyat and other places where the settlers, gangs of settler thugs are going in, burning villages and killing people and cutting olive trees and expelling people from their homes. That's in the West Bank, let alone Gaza. So this is a fascinating, important historical turning point, and we can see a lot of it happening here in the US and in Europe. It's there, but it'll take more time to become more visible.
Thank you. Yes, I think those internal dynamics in the U.S. are interesting, and even beyond what the changes in attitudes on the Palestinian-Israeli issue, Americans are certainly have no appetite. It seems like for more military engagement in the Middle East, and it seems like Biden is ignoring that and playing a little bit of a dangerous game here for him politically, for the American people to an extent. So that's an interesting dynamic. Inez, if we don't mind going back to Palestine, I want to engage you a little bit. One side we haven't heard from very much, at least that I haven't heard from, is the Palestinian Authority leadership. That's actually somebody the Americans, speaking of the Americans, have tried to engage with, but their role in this and their position within Palestinian society and the Palestinian political dynamics had been very much eroded, very much weakened. Has there been any response from PA leaders? I heard there were protests that were dealt with heavy-handedly. What are you seeing in that side of things?
Yes, I think what's happening is yet another signal of not only the irrelevance of the Palestinian Authority rulers. I don't like to call them leadership because they're not leaders at this point anymore, and their complicity. I think so. If you talk to Palestinians in society, there will be a sort of range of opinions. But basically, there will be between those who think they are either totally irrelevant to those who think they are very clearly complicit. We've seen in the demonstrations happening in the various cities in solidarity with Gaza, indeed calls for change, a political change. I think the only sort of the only thing we've seen from the PA is like loose statements about holding Israel responsible for what's happening, and that's it. And now they're also repressing the demonstrations in the West Bank, some of them very heavily. You know, the Palestinian security forces also before October 7, were also repressing Palestinian dissenting groups from Fatah dissenting groups from the main sort of rulers in Nablus and Jenin were heavily repressed by the PA forces. So I think it's yet another sign of the need for change. And not only that, but I think there is a big problem that, again, we're looking at rulers who are still the face of the Palestinian, so they are the official interlocutors in the face of international community. So at the time, I think where it's unprecedented, this outrageous positioning of the US, of the West, who are effectively facilitating and supporting genocidal intent and unfolding genocide in Gaza. You have, I think, I saw President Macron came to Ramallah, and he basically said in the face of President Abbas, we're sorry for all the civilian deaths, basically for which Hamas terrorist attack are responsible. That's how he framed things entirely. So, the Palestinian people are being slaughtered in Gaza, and this is what a leader is being told in his face, like a totally dehumanizing statement. And no response, absolutely zero political courage, zero political, I think, will. And so, we're there as Palestinian civil society. We don't represent the Palestinian people politically, but all of us are trying to organize and to protest and to talk. And this is where the Palestinian diaspora is so important, right? What we're seeing in capitals around the world with demonstrations is the importance also of the Palestinian people taking things in their own hands, speaking for themselves in a very decentralized way, in a very sort of, we have a common voice, but it's very, again, it's fragmented, decentralized, because we don't have a PLO anymore. We don't have a consolidated leadership. And I think this is what the Palestinians are missing at the moment, but this is also what the Israelis are actively repressing. I mean, let's face it, why don't we have a united national movement? And why also is Hamas taking things, as they want in their own hands and taking the upper hand here? It's because of the absence of a unified, at least consensus built leadership for the Palestinian national movement. And I think it's everything that's unfolding now is also a consequence of the lack of Fatah willingness and the current rulers to basically give up power and start really by, I think, pushing back against the Israeli interests and the US interests, who are trying to basically keep things in the same political status quo and with the same people in power, because it is very convenient for Israel.
Those are really excellent points. And obviously the connection between the fragmentation within the Palestinian politics, the situation in Gaza as it's existed since 2007, and the connection to what has unfolded are all really excellent points. And we'll get back to the issue of kind of solidarity later and how that's panning out in the Palestinian diaspora. Joseph, actually, Inez, one quick comment, because I wanted to follow up on something. One thing I've been hearing is in terms of day after, and we're talking about that kind of Israeli plan that we've mentioned multiple times. One thing Hamas has played a role in is the kind of governance of Gaza to, in a sense, to Israel's convenience. It needs to rely on somebody to manage the population of millions in the absence of its direct occupation. And we're hearing the possibility that the PA can be brought back into Gaza to manage things after all things are done. Just like, maybe a quick comment on the possibility of that while we're on the PA.
I didn't get the last point. The possibility of, sorry?
Of, bringing the PA back into Gaza to govern things after, Hamas is taken out of there. Just quick comment, is that even a feasibility?
I mean, it could be a scenario in the sense that, again, you have people in power in the PA who would be very willing to, again, manage, like they're just managing the occupation in the West Bank. They would manage the occupation in Gaza and, you know, give a few more permits to people and you know, kind of do a bit more of the same, just a bit of a relief for the people, but not actively working to confront and resist the occupation. Now, I think that this for me, it's very bewildering. This narrative, this policy direction of the West of trying to eradicate Hamas. That's not even something that is feasible. Obviously, it plays into the war on terror and the sort of these absurd parallels that are made with the global jihad and like Daesh and whatever. But Hamas it has a political branch. It's a national movement. It's a resistance movement. It has an armed branch. And so, you know, you can obviously question the methods, right? Killing civilians or not, but Hamas is embedded in Palestinian society. And so actually Palestinians have been, living under governance of Hamas in Gaza. Hamas is existing in the West Bank. It is part and parcel of the national movement, whether you agree with it or not. You cannot eradicate it. And I think this is obviously then what the Israelis want to sell to the West, and this very dangerous rhetoric that the West is promoting of, you know, sort of eradicating Hamas. But I think it's very dangerous because it's completely misunderstanding the political colonial reality we live in, and also what Hamas is and isn't.
Thank you very much. Those are all good points. Joseph, let's go back to you. You know, beyond the kind of regional possibility of war, you know, what has the response been from the region from a diplomatic standpoint? I mean, it occurred to me that, you know, relative to the West and kind of the, you know, the beating of the war drums that's coming out of Western capitals, you know, the situation has been quite markedly different in Arab capitals in terms of their willingness to mediate, to call for ceasefires, to, you know, mediate on hostages. Obviously, Qatar has been very involved in negotiating on that standpoint. Can you kind of dive into the diplomatic reaction and response from the region, looking at the Gulf, looking at Jordan, and especially looking at Egypt and its own calculus? You're on mute, Joseph.
Okay, let me try to break this down, I mean, and take it slice by slice. First of all, the overall picture, I mean, the global picture is very much resemblant to what we are used to in terms of when things flare up on the Israeli-Palestinian front, unfortunately. I mean, on the Security Council level, for example, yesterday was very illustrative of that. You had two Security Council resolutions that were put on the table that canceled each other, one by Russia and China and one by the US. So the veto right played completely here, which is more of a remake of many episodes of this. This is one. Two, and we already said it, but let me restate it and maybe highlight it. I think maybe this is where I think things are more nuanced on the American level. I have no doubt, and of course, Rami is fully right. There's a full-fledged coverage of Israel by the Biden administration, and this was very clear in the trip of Biden to Israel last week. But at the same time, this very, I would say, indecent moral coverage and huge financial and political coverage, the $14 billion that has been granted to Israel, are probably also used in order to try to refrain Israel from doing something rash and irrational, not for the sake of the other side, but for the sake of Israel. Today, the motto in the US is, let's try to save Israel from itself first. This is, I mean, to sum it up. Then you have the Arab positions. I tend to think, and maybe this would be a little bit surprising for some, but I tend to think that compared to what we are so far used from the Arab side, this time there is a sort of, let's say, moderately stiff posture, I would say, also because it's driven by self-survival. It's not driven by the sake of let's say, rescuing Palestine or siding with the Palestinian rights, but it's because most of these countries, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and others, are perceiving that probably the fact of having left the Palestinian issue to others, and the others here is mainly Iran, they are ending up paying high costs politically. So now there is an attempt, and it's very clear from the Saudi part at least, there is an attempt to re-seize this question in a format, of course, that will not be very daring and very much, let's say, annoying for the US or for the West, but there is an attempt to let's say, to seize again the Palestinian issue and banner and put it on the table under their own name. Now, how far will it go? I think this will be a function of the scenario of the end of the war, if it ends soon. And then you have, and here I maybe go further towards your question, you have other parties, the outsiders, let's say Russia, China, etc., that are trying to maximize the benefits they could derive from such a crisis. Just to give you an idea, Russia today, for example, a few hours ago, Hamas is now received in Moscow. They have there's a delegation of Hamas that has landed in Moscow. They are seeing Lavrov, probably they will meet Putin, etc. So the Russians are trying to do two things here. First of all, to, of course, maximize the benefit they could derive of a new chaotic hotspot on the globe and deflect, let's say, the spots from what's happening in Ukraine, maybe also hoping to entangle the US in another crisis. But at the same time, Putin is very much tempted in appearing today as a sort of firefighter, in a way to erase or tame the image that he has gained in Ukraine as a bloodthirsty war criminal. So these countries are trying to take benefit from the crisis in order to, if not build the pillars of a, let's say, multipolar world, because it's too soon to say to tell about that, but at least to try to gain some lost positions lately. So here I would like to say a few words about the Arab posture, if you allow me. I think that what happened in the Cairo summit last week was not insignificant. I mean, of course, it was a very dull ballet, as we usually know about the Arab League summits. But at the same time, you have countries that now are really playing their own lifeline, directly and physically. I mean, Egypt is tetanized by the idea of having to swallow something like 1 million Palestinian refugees. This is a time bomb for the Sisi regime. Jordan is living the same phobia and fear also, and if only for something, this is a reason for them to take a more, let's say, a bolder position on the issue. Now, of course, you have in parallel to that the normalization processes that were at play. And I think that somewhere, if we can enter the mindset of the Saudi leadership, they are probably saying to themselves that they were lucky for not having normalized earlier than that. I think that now they really perceive that as long as the Palestinian issue is vivid and alive and kicking and hurting, they can, I think, add something in the negotiation, let's say, agenda with the Israelis when and if the normalization process is on again. So this is a very quick survey of the international scene. I will not go up to saying that the Gaza war could be an inflection point in the global system, but I think that it's a very important turning point.
Thank you. So almost, I mean, you're hearing a little bit of a, kind of a cynical point of view from all these international players in terms of how they can seek advantage, even the Saudi point of view to, raise the price, so to speak, of, normalization if that process continues down the road at some point. But obviously with Russia with Putin, deflecting away from what's happening in Ukraine and elsewhere. I mean, can you speak a little bit, Joseph, maybe about again the possibilities for mediation that are coming out of the region, the attempts on that aspect, and how this is, kind of fit into maybe Qatar's foreign policy? Obviously, they've taken maybe the most active role so far among the Gulf states.
I'm very sorry to be maybe a bit pessimistic, but I think it's a bit too soon now for any diplomatic serious attempt to resolve the issue. I think that unfortunately the war, or at least the Israeli riposte on Gaza, has to take its let's say its leeway for a while before we see some serious diplomatic attempt to stop things. Now, once it's done, maybe in 1, 2, 3 weeks, I don't know. Of course, many candidates are there on the line. The Americans are trying to posture themselves, maybe I would say in a so far at least more successful manner than other Europeans. For example, the French have lost their occasion, probably with Macron's very catastrophic visit to the region. The Americans are trying, and they are, again, I'm stressing on that, balancing a very full-fledged coverage for Israel with a strong, let's say, repeat of the sentence that from now on the Palestinian issue has to be taken care of in a way or another. It was repeated by Biden today. Now, what will be the format of that? I don't have any illusion. I don't think it will go far. Then you have the other candidates that also are under the risk of losing their edge as mediators if the crisis continues. Take Turkey, for example. Turkey could have been a mediator. Turkey lately have mended the fences with Israel, is in a very good relation with Hamas for obvious reasons, and they could have played a role. However, the gravity of the action, of the military action, the direness of the humanitarian distress in Gaza has pushed yesterday Erdogan to say openly, I'm regretting that I have mended fences with Israel. So he's exiting his mediation role. Now, you're talking about Qatar, everybody's talking about Qatar. We all have Qatar on mind. But Qatar, I think, beyond or wider than the role of playing a very important role in the hostage freeing, in things having to do with the humanitarian, let's say, ordeal of Gaza, of maybe tomorrow putting some money to reconstruct the enclave and the strip, I don't think that Qatar will be allowed to play a greater role on the wider diplomatic scene, or at least a role that is very autonomous from Saudi Arabia, from maybe a new Arab, let's say, format, joining Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, maybe Kuwait and Qatar, and playing a role. It's a little bit like, I don't want to draw to draw comparisons, but it's a little bit like in Lebanon. You know, Qatar was very much at the forefront of a Lebanese mediation for solving the presidential deadlock, but it was doing it under the ceiling and under the, let's say, the threshold of a Saudi American posture. So I think that today, one of the problems of this crisis in Gaza is that there are very few mediators that are able today to play an efficient role. And unfortunately, and this is the law of war and the law of crises like this, you have to wait for conditions to be ripe for a mediation to start operating. And unfortunately, things are not ripe yet.
Thank you, Joseph. I think you're right in that regard. Let's take some more audience questions. Rami, let's go back to you. There's a question about the, obviously there's a huge disparity between Hamas and the Israelis in terms of, one being a state, one having a military, the other not having that. I mean, you can get into the asymmetries are massive. But once a ground invasion starts, those things may start to narrow a little bit. Can you talk about, what a ground invasion might look like, why the Israelis have not gone in yet, and that kind of tension that's building between them and their backers, maybe?
Sure.
Let's keep it short, and then we're going to, go into the final thoughts here in a bit.
I think there's very little to say about ground invasion phase because it's all speculation. And you've got tons of speculation going on all over the world. It doesn't really help to add. But what's clear is that people in Israel and especially the military, have a greater respect for Hamas's capabilities as they do for Hezbollah's. And they're not going to get bogged down in a long-term process that's going to tie them down. And then during the middle of this ground war, that you're going to find another 1,000 rockets fired at Israeli civilians in the middle of Israel. So there's not much we can say beyond just speculating, and that's not very useful. But what I would just add is that the critical, the throbbing heart of this conflict, which has not been addressed in any serious way in the last 2 weeks or so, is the combination of the nature of resistance that Hamas represents, with the Palestinian people all over the world speaking out and pushing back against Israeli propaganda, combined with the total lack of any discussion of how do we get to the root causes and try to solve them through a new peace negotiation. Because it shows us that Zionism does not want to negotiate a peace with an Israeli sovereign, self-determinant state. Zionism wants to control all the land of Palestine. They said it in the early 20s, and they're doing it now. They want to get rid of the Palestinians slowly. They've been doing it steadily, and they want to keep doing it. That creates a massive block on any kind of process that will achieve peace. And therefore, the Americans, as Joe said, are doing this dance, which they're not very good at, where they have this massive military show of force and support and this and that, but they don't want to get involved in another regional war. So unless we understand the nature of Palestinian resistance, armed and peaceful, and not see the isolation slowly of Israel among societies all over the world, and then look at how do we solve this by going to a real peace negotiations with possibly, as Joseph said about the Saudis, they're obviously focusing more on this again, maybe a revised Arab peace plan that can be negotiated quietly behind the scenes. These are all wishful thinking things, but unless this is done, we're going to see more of what we've seen in the last 20 or 30 years. This is the culmination of a century of settler colonialism supported by Western powers, the British, then the Americans, implemented by increasingly militant and radical and barbaric Zionist powers, which is the state of Israel, and finally eliciting responses from the Palestinians and others who support them. And so we've got to get out of this situation through a negotiated settlement at some point.
Thank you. Inez, this is another question from the audience. I think you're not an international human rights lawyer, but there's some question about, obviously, in the face of ongoing and blatant war crimes that are being committed in Israel, and Israel, I don't think, has even shied away from explicitly stating that it has no intention to abide by international law in prosecuting this campaign on the Gaza Strip. Are there prospects for challenging Israel in terms of international law and in the international court system and all that kind of stuff? I mean, there were ongoing cases there already. Is this something that can happen, especially with the United States and Western Europe and these powerful political parties backing Israel to the hilt through this process? I mean, is that something that's open? And then maybe, this is a question I had wanted to bring to you, if you have time, to discuss, the fact that this what's happening now is just captured the attention of the whole world. You're seeing, in capitals across the world, people in the streets in support of what's happening in Gaza. Maybe you can discuss a little bit of the implications of that in terms of global support for the Palestinian cause and the relationship between people and governments.
Thank you. Yeah, two important questions. I would say, Palestinians know that international law will not liberate us or Palestinians, but it's an important tool. However, what we're seeing now, it's clear, is that the culture of impunity that Israel has been, basically has grown and has been cultivating is even more blatant than ever. The double standards. We're talking about a multilateral system that is not able to call for a ceasefire when there is an ongoing genocide and huge massacres. I mean, you know, if we compare to even what's happening in Ukraine or what happened in the Balkans, I mean, so I think the current, I think it's a very, I think it's a moment. What's happening for us is also something that is affecting the entire multilateral system, the entire world, of like exposing the double standards, exposing the politicization and the political nature of how countries, states are using, you know, international law a la carte. And I think this is something that has been happening for a while now, the you know, redesigning of alliances, I think the loss of trust and the loss of credibility of the United Nations. Obviously, the United Nations is only the sum of its parts, member states, and especially those who have veto power in the Security Council. And we've seen, right, like the BRICS, you know, how what's unfolding around the BRICS, and the fact that the Global South is now trying to I think get a voice away from institutions that are Western dominated. So whether it's in the finance world, in around climate, around responsibilities, but also what's unfolding here, it's that, and this leads to your second question, the entire world is looking on TV, on Instagram, a genocide unfolding, like literally an entire territory being erased, and no one can stop this at the moment. And you have leaders who continue to debate whether to call for a pause or for a ceasefire. To, you know, to us, this is, again, this is insane. And I think it's about, so I think the, you know, international law in the face of like civil society or people is something that seems very remote and very abstract given its politicization. And I think we're clearly now, and we see the impact of the information war, of the information and the narrative and the propaganda, and also what is unfolding. If you know, if you see some events that unfolded, and the you know, the Israeli government and the Israeli army are now used to lie. I mean, from Shireen Abu Akleh or even Mohammed al-Dura in 2002, I mean, there's been multiple cases of where the Israeli army and the government are either placing evidence, trafficking evidence, videos, etc. And this, and given the, I think, the scale and the solidarity that has I think been seen in the streets and online, the leaders had to kind of adjust their language. So also they cannot ignore the streets, they cannot ignore their people, and I think they had to react in some way to also that that solidarity. However, I think there is very dangerous things at play, especially in the West. I think the narrative, for example, that is being pushed, that this is something between Jewish people and Muslims, you know, like the fact that this would be a religious war, things that are essentialized. Yes, it's true that Hamas has killed Jewish people, but not because they're Jewish, because they're occupiers, because they're colonizers, and Israel has been exploiting that since its inception, you know, like basically trying to speak for all the Jews and all the Jewish people around the world. This is very dangerous in general for the Jews, and it's neither helping to fight anti-Semitism, and is certainly not helping to liberate Palestinians. And I think this is playing now, and it's very dangerous, because if these narratives keep being pushed, will continue to be dragged into further tragedy, and you know, and not being able to see that this is a colonial, you know, a political struggle and a colonial struggle. And so I think this is where the information battle, the narrative battle is so important, because it has a direct implication on people. And we've seen also the censorship on social media having direct impact on Gazans. And it's very, you know, dangerous, because beyond cutting electricity and so on, they've also, you know, the fact that some posts are taken out, some people are, you know, their voices cut and so on, has had, or that they're called liars. Now we're called even liars about figures, about facts, you know, like the Ministry of Health. Now the new Israeli talking point is about questioning that there is even civilians being killed. And so all of that plays into the direct reality on the ground. So that's where I think we need to, this is also what we can do from here, right? Like we're not in the battlefront, we're not in Gaza. We need to fight this information propaganda war.
Yes, dangerous trends indeed, and it's amazing what sticks when it comes out of the Israeli, media and military establishment. I think we have about 4 minutes, so maybe some time for final thoughts. One thing that Inez mentioned was international law at a cart. This is just, I'm throwing a couple of things out there. Joseph, you brought up that, this is not really an inflection point, at least not yet, but it's a delicate moment, I think, in the international system. There's challenges to the prevailing order of kind of U.S. supremacy in the system and this what's happened. And it could not be the international system. I don't think an international law on these things couldn't be at a kind of a weaker point than they are now. And so throwing this in the mix along with Ukraine and everything else, let's hear your thoughts, final thoughts, anything you need to say on this, and then we'll go to Rami.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit too soon to say where the system is going globally, but I'm maybe trying to look for some glimpses of optimism in all this, maybe very naively, I don't know. But I have the feeling that if the US succeeds in putting a cap, let's say a ceiling on Israel's response, and is able to, let's say, rely on the sort of new Arab let's say, consciousness that the Palestinian question has to be more seriously addressed than before. And 3, if Iran is able to play the game of keeping all this contained to only Gaza and Israel and Palestine, maybe there's a hope that after this crisis, there will be an unlocking of something that has been dragging on for now 3-4 years, which is a sort of more serious American-Iranian dialogue over the region. I think that the Iranians are also calculating somewhere the fact that probably if Biden is going to disappear from the scene next year in the US, because all the polls are showing that, probably they have to try to secure something before a return of a Trump administration. This is maybe the only hope I have here, but in order to reach that point, unfortunately, and again, I say it, lots of destruction has to go on, lots of death has to occur. We'll have to stomach and swallow a lot of suffering and destruction. And I hope that this will not be in vain that time. This is all what I can say to end on a much less gloomy note than what the situation and the reality is supposed to push us forward.
Thank you, Joseph. Rami, if you don't mind.
Yeah, 2 quick related points. The first is that one of the most striking things that I see in the United States, and you see it all over the world, is the new mechanisms that are created by Palestinians and their progressive and honorable allies all over the world to fight back peacefully against the Zionist Israeli propaganda and PR onslaughts. There's an attempt to silence Palestinians now. Zionism took our land. They're now trying to take our voices away. They're trying to prevent Palestinians from speaking out and other pro-Palestinian people. And there's a great pushback here. There's hundreds of institutions, civil society groups, legal people, political people, social mobilization, university groups. It's a very new landscape, and the Israelis don't know how to deal with this. That's why they've doubled down. They call anybody who criticizes them anti-Semitic, or they say you're like ISIS. And this doesn't work like it used to. They know this. So this is a huge moment, and it's just starting to become evident. The impact will be seen down the road. The second point I would make is that big crises take time to shift. Joseph's talk about shifting to a peace negotiation or something eventually, I totally agree with that. But if you look at South Africa, apartheid took a long time to end. If you look at the Soviet Union, you look at Northern Ireland, you look at other conflicts around the world, they changed when leaders at the top realized that they could not sustain what they were doing. And they agreed to a radical shift. We have to see that happen in Israel at some point. No sign of it now, but everybody agrees that Netanyahu's got to go. This will take time. But if people realize that the Arabs are willing to coexist with an Israeli state, which we've said 3 times, we would recognize them, the Palestinians have, and there is a chance for a negotiation that would satisfy both sides, then we could see serious progress down the road, but only when Zionism ends being Zionism and the Israeli state decides to live as a state that respects the international rule of law. There are many Israelis who want to do that, and I think we need to just keep pushing in that direction.
Thank you, Ram. We had a hard stop at 11:15 and it's 11:16, but I want to give Inez just a quick chance. Do you want anything, final thoughts to say? I mean, I thought your last comments were excellent, but any final words?
No, just to give the audience, hope we all have agency, and I think in our different capacities, we have the ability, the responsibility to pressure for all of the demands and the things that can move us forward. The first being a ceasefire, and all the rest that we discussed now. I think it's in our power, if each of us take our responsibilities. And thank you very much.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. Thank you to all 3 of our panelists for an enlightening conversation in a very dark time. I certainly benefited from it. So thank you for your insights. And as you said, Inez, I think all of us, it's incumbent on us to do what we can in this moment. I know everybody feels powerless, but what you can do in your own communities to help put a stop to what's happening. Thank you for that. And thank you on behalf of my institution, the Middle East Council on Global Affairs and the Sam Ferris Institute. Thanks to you for everybody who dialed in. Take care.
Thank you.